Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Also below this video, you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth debate. Now, we are joined by 10th Man, Neil, and a whole bunch of people in Discord, so welcome one and all.
Greetings, everybody.
Hey, hey.
Hello.
How are you?
We're all good, very enthusiastic, considering there's only a couple of you in G+. How are you all in Discord? We practiced this in the pre-show.
Great.
Thanks.
I'm on top of the world.
Top of the world? Top of what world?
You gotta end it off with Ma. I'm on top of the world, Ma.
Yeah, that's part of heliocentric programming as far as I can ascertain.
Sounds like a boxer.
Up is up for all
that's
of us.
Humphrey Bogart.
Reclaim.
That's James Cagney.
Yeah, thank you for that, Neil. The expansion on what you just said was so welcomed.
welcome.
And
You know, Neil does have the movie lines.
so being on top of the world would be a gravitational assertion. In other words, you're always on the top of the sphere. It's always positioned from your vantage point at the top of a sphere. You're looking down towards the curve that's dropping away from you 8 inches per mile squared. The top of the world thing is just heliocentric programming as far as I know.
I don't think James Cagney meant it that way.
Matthew Capucci does.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hey, Arwin. Yeah, I trimmed that out. I was keen to get that out there because I'd messaged him. I thought if I'd messaged somebody that I haven't actually put the video out for yet, because I was hoping he'd join the show. vain hope of that happening. But nevertheless, I just chopped it down, put it together and put it out last night so that it was there. And I think I went onto his Facebook and shared a link with him. But we were reasonably polite, other than me calling him a dick at one point. Yes, Nathan, I thought it was a great show yesterday. Glad you edited it. I'm really pleased to know that. Worthwhile doing all this work.
What?
I thought it was a great show. I was refraining from reading that because I thought you were going to yell at me for bringing something ridiculous like that.
On the contrary, several people in the comment section noted that they'd been confronted with similar things. So a guy mentioned, a black guy on TikTok was saying the exact same thing and that was shoved under my nose. And you're like, oh, right, okay. So this particular argument is being punted out there at the moment. You know, it's a little bit Vsauce-esque in terms of moving out towards the centre of a pancake when gravity's still in effect. You know, it's a very similar vein of argument. But these things are secular, right? They come round and around and around. And it doesn't matter if it's 8 months, 12 months, 16 months, whatever. They just recycle the same old garbage. So the fact that this particular person has dipped his toe into the water of flat earth to the tune of one Google search with that term exactly, tap, 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 flat earth, straight to the Flat Earth Society controlled op narrative to see what they say, and then stereotype fallacy the hell out of everybody else who actually understands a little bit more about science, the nature of the world that we're living in, how the heliocentric model works, how gravity works, how atmosphere sphere-shaped air works, how begging the question fallacies, false dichotomies, and affirming the consequence work. All of which is not going to be privileged information for somebody who's just throwing up this strawman fallacy of how a disk Earth works with gravity on it.
You know what else I noticed, Nathan, as I read the article? They'll bring up something like the Mad Mike guy who died doing launching a rocket, just to make it look like, we're stupid, and it turns fatal for somebody to believe in this flat Earth. He threw that in the article too.
Okay, that's one dude. Okay, Mad Mike, who was doing rocket launches long before flat Earth. Hello? Mad Mike was doing rocket launches long before flat Earth came around, and that got him a certain level of publicity that he wanted. Now, we all know how ineffective and unuseful travelling up a few hundred feet in a bloody rocket's going to be. I mean, what exactly was he trying to achieve? See the curve of the Earth, or see how flat it was? Well, the horizon's not Earth curve, and there are a lot more efficient ways of getting up high than using a steam-powered rocket. It is bonkers. Now, anybody here would assert different ideas about how you would debunk the spherical Earth, and none of them would involve steam-powered rockets.
Yeah, but the way he threw it
I
in
should
there,
hope so.
they did it for a reason, trust me. They're very crafty with how they do things. Oh, look, it turns fatal for this guy to believe in flat Earth.
Well,
Did he, though?
But it's not his belief in flat Earth that killed him, it was his desire to go up in steam-powered rockets that killed him.
I know that.
But how much did he even believe in it?
Enough to get a banner on the side of it.
But he wanted to, advertise, but how did he even know any arguments? Did he really, or did he just seek attention?
I think he just sought attention. I don't know how many arguments he knew. I mean, whenever I saw him interviewed, he wasn't putting across great globe debunkings or flat Earth proofs. He's just talking about his rocket.
Remember, he's the sort of guy that wants to
with us.
toss stuff in a steam rocket.
Yeah, crazy guy. Now, the fact that a crazy guy understands that the Earth is flat, does that tarnish every flat earther? Well, it does if you utilise stereotyping fallacies, which our opponents do. Well, are there not insane people who believe they're on a sphere? Oh, yes, there are many, many, many bonkers people who think they're on a sphere. I mean, literally, clinically bonkers people who still think like everyone else does that they're on a sphere, even though it's an outrageous claim. So should we tar everybody on the globe side of the argument as being clinically insane? Because there are clinically insane people who think they're on a sphere. No, that's just a stereotyping fallacy.
You could almost say it would make you... Yeah, there is a stereotyping fallacy, but again, to believe you're on a ball is almost to that level of clinically insane when you take in all of the information that is pushed out there.
I agree.
By them.
I agree, and that's applicable only to anti-flat earthers, though. So if you approach somebody who's been indoctrinated into a cult from birth, they're probably perfectly normal, reasonable people in many respects. They're just people. However, their views on whatever the cult has brainwashed them with are those views. Doesn't mean that they're suddenly clinically insane. However, once that person has had it explained to them to the point where they can understand and recognise it, if they still choose to side with something that's clearly not true after explanation, then that is insane. Now, for me, because the mass society normies who don't appreciate any better and aren't in any way capable of being classified as broadly as, all flat earthers are nuts because Mad Mike went up in a steam rocket, because you've got a certain proportion of them that have fallen off the wagon of globe belief because they've come across us and are now in what I would, describe as a not insane, but definitely cognitively painful position. And that could potentially push you over the edge of insanity eventually. In other words, it would be a concerning position to be cognitively fighting with the nature of Earth, the assumptions of the obvious and observable navigatably flat plane that we live on and fly across. All of those things you're going to process if you're fallen from the, whatever the word is, ignorance of being on a globe and not caring. And just saying, we just know, without giving it a second thought. Well, those people, some of them will descend into insanity eventually.
Eventually, so yeah. Yeah, they're more informed by the insane and are yet to be insane because of the lack of understanding. Yeah, I would agree with that, 100%.
Well, they want to project that out onto us as well. The anti-flat earthers project out onto us how we're cult-like and insane. You're like, well, actually, no, I don't have any problems whatsoever cognitively or functionally or societally even when I go out and, perform my normie duties as a father or as a grocery shopper or as a consumer. I don't have any problems. I'm not constantly worried about the nature of reality. When I do think about it, it's an absolute joy. Now, by contrast, our opponents who spend hours and hours and hours and hours arguing in comments with the same old fallacies again and again and again, ignoring all responses, yeah, that's going to be painful. Now, I have no desire or need or requirement to do any of those things, but our opponents on the anti-flat earth side do feel like we are someone to have a war with. It's like, no, I'm just going about my day. Go on.
Well, again, we are the people that are effectively destroying the reality they believe that they live in, right? So, again, anyone that questions the underlying fabric of where you're living on is someone to be seen as an enemy, right? People would find it too painful. Again, that word painful, right? Much like the moon landings, they find it too painful to adjust their minds. And I would say that was just, again, that would be something that would be indoctrinated into us almost. This idea of like not moving from one perspective to the next, because to do so effectively is almost to call yourself a liar, right? If you dump one idea for the next, you're a liar, right? This is the way that the world makes it, and actually it's actually just something that would make you intellectually honest. In fact, actually, not a liar. It's the opposite, but they might portray it that way.
It's a trait of more a higher state of intellectual being rather than a lower one. Being able to recognise something that you has held as true, reassess it, and then realise that it isn't, and change your position, change your mind. That's something that more intellectual people do rather than less intellectual.
You've got to think about the nature of the world in and of itself, right? This plane that we live on, when in fact that is propositioned as something that's the opposite of what it actually is. The intellectually honest man is now defined as the liar unto himself if he adjusts his position at all. That's a terrible sort of, and I'm glad there are people like us that are actually challenging that and actually laying out the logical framework of changing a logical framework. How terrible it is that we actually have to lay out the logical framework of how to change your logical framework. That's, yeah.
You've got to appeal to people to want that mentally, and most of them don't. It's far easier to be told what is what and just abide by what you've been told. And yeah, the extreme of that is that you'll move heaven and earth to keep your cognitive bias. And we see that in pseudoscience all the time. When they talk about Earth maintaining a central position and this not being acceptable, that's a good example of that. We want to maintain our bias that we're not in a position of any sort of special nature, centre of anything. No, that's just not allowed. That's not acceptable. You go, well, why not? Because it doesn't conform with your current preconceived beliefs about a sphere Earth in a heliocentric model. So therefore it's not acceptable. It's like, what are you actually discussing here? You're discussing a philosophy. And you're deciding that the philosophy that's going to be reified by the masses is not acceptable because it doesn't match with what you've already decided the world is. You're like, okay, well, I don't want to buy into any of that crap. I don't have to. And it doesn't affect me that I don't have to buy that crap. But the people who do want to buy that crap and then come here and tell us how it's true, they're the ones actually preaching to us, trying to convert us back into their sphere belief religion. Not the other way around. They'll tell us that we're cultish. It's like, we're not on an indoctrination drive. We're not trying to recruit people into this way of being. Far from it. When we describe how we've been lied to and explain how it doesn't jive with reality, that's not us trying to indoctrinate anybody. It's trying to uneducate them in the nonsense that they've been taught to date.
Even the suggestion that it is a form of indoctrination, it's like, well, why would we go to the effort in order to, put the effort in order to put this across to people in a way that they can understand in order for indoctrination? Obviously, again, the idea that someone would do that obviously comes, and I think they unconsciously know this to be true. That's why they would label us indoctrinators. To label us indoctrinators would suggest that they understand what indoctrination is, right? So again, that's, yeah, you're exactly right. It's cognitive dissonance. It's like, again, I have to label them as that in order that what I've been through is not that itself, right? That's really the place that it comes from. Something that's actually interesting that happened today is we were speaking to a theoretical physicist, right? And I took him through the Black Swan. We actually took him through lots of different things. Me and Eli did this together, and he was very intellectually honest and was able to admit these things. I've added him as a friend. He was a little bit inebriated, But I could tell that he knew that what he was talking about in terms of in his field, right? So yeah, it's someone that I've added as a friend, and hopefully he did say he would be willing to come and speak with people at a time when he was less inebriated. But I feel like it would be a good conversation for people to hear, because he effectively heard us guys talking last night, and he simply was looking at the comment section and was like, wait a minute, everyone's saying these people are crazy, but from his own field, he understands, let's say, that the issues with inside of peer review, for instance, that these axioms that have to be meted out, these tangents effectively that have to intersect in order for this thing to be true, affirming the consequence type fallacies. And he was able to say that he effectively has seen this with inside of his field, right? And that it's effectively a circle jerk. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And he was very intellectually honest. And it's good that we're presenting the information the way that we are, because, like he said, that he had never took this seriously, and he saw it as more of like a macabre, like satire type thing, fairies and all this sort of stuff, when he's listened to people like Professor Dave, who are just straw manning us, right? And not representing anything that we actually say.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it's positioned at surface level. And I think a lot of the times, like with the guy we covered yesterday, their surface level research and laziness perpetuates out that surface level bullshit to the masses. So that's good enough, really. You only need to scratch the surface a little bit to realise that what you're calling Professor Dave surface level bullshit. For most people, that's enough. They'll have a cursory glance at what they find when they do a search in YouTube, and what they will find is anti-flat earthers. And the anti-flat earther throws up a straw man, or maybe a false dichotomy to go with it, and people just go, yeah, I thought it was silly, and off they go.
Yeah, 100%. Again, it's them not wanting to actually challenge what it is that they believe at the end of the day, because the status quo is always easier. Like, people don't want these sort of like fast driving motions, but again, everything that's sort of going on in the world is kind of like, this is sort of a consciousness thing that I believe is going to be, should I say, more predominant now in terms of across the masses, because people are starting to see that they're going to be made to be uncomfortable, even if they wish to sort of stupor in their ignorance and go along ignorance and in bliss, right? That their bliss may be disturbed by outside influences regardless. So again, it would be good to sort of see the way that people might be more willing to effectively go, oh, okay, maybe I'll scratch beneath that sort of surface level in order to see a little bit further, because once the different parts of their reality are sort of adjusted by other outside influences, maybe they might want to start taking some sort of responsibility for that, what it is that they believe themselves, due to the fact that they realize that, right, that someone else can come in and change it without them.
No, they'll look for someone else to do it for them. So that's what people like Professor Dave represent. They represent I kind of want to go out and either affirm what I already know or disprove it, but it would be much easier if someone else had already done that for me. I'll have a look, see who else has done that for me. Oh, look, Professor Dave has done it for me. What does Professor Dave say? Because people are lazy.
Yeah. If it is laziness at this point at best, right? The information is there, right? We have people effectively in the scientific community, scientific explainers, and then you have people like us as well that are willing to sort of walk people through these things, and sometimes actually, again, like, we're wasting energy when we do so, but we do so regardless, right? In pursuit of truth and understanding, right? But it's often a bit of a shame where it ends up lining up in terms of people being so lazy. And I sometimes just think it's a general lacking in people's ability to perceive and understand these ideas. I've sort of noticed that, again, like, this sort of view of the world, right, from the outside of the world, from space, right, taking that sort of position that people need these representative images from people like NASA, for instance, right? And I believe they need that orthographical sort of view, right? It's because they maybe don't have that sort of way of thinking in their brain. And I'm starting to realize that some people don't. Like, me and Flat Earth Solar were talking about this the other day. There's a rebacking.
What's a conceptual spatial awareness and being able to process
Exactly that.
what's been presented in 2D or Muppet vision, not being able to cognitively realise that that's not what you're presented with in reality. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, effectively, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, is that some people are lacking this capability to go into their own mind and effectively take their point of view away from something in order to look at it from a different perspective. So they need these representations, or they need people to do this for them because they've yet to utilize that form of their brain. And this sort of follows with linearized curriculum, right? We are all sort of learning in the same fashion, in the same way for so long. And this becomes people are sort of general practitioners. They're never actually experts in anything. But again, you can be a general practitioner, understand the vernacular of something, and then delve into it deeper. It doesn't mean you have to stick with one topic. You can continue to go forth and do so. It's an exercise of that form of modality of understanding that you can change, your perspective and understand. Maybe it's just, in relation to where the sun might be versus, where it should be going, higher up, for instance, understanding, higher in latitude or longitude. Sorry, higher in. I mix them two every time. But yeah, you get my overall point is that there's a general lacking in people's capability to take themselves away from where they're stood and go to a different place in order to look at things. And that's sort of what I'm noticing in people a lot of recent. And that's why they sort of look to these other organizations in order to sort of show that for them. Again, just I would ask people to sort of try to exercise that muscle in order to understand things, because it does aid you.
Yeah, right. Again, on the last few shows, we've been saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, you can't make people want to process their world when they've literally intentionally gone out and sought out the people who have done it for them so that they don't have to.
You can lead a glober to water, but you can't make him think.
Exactly. You can't give people critical thought. Critical thinking skills aren't something that's taught in the normal education system. And most people don't have those skills. And if you haven't exercised them from a reasonably early age, you may never, ever exercise them or realise what critical thinking even is. Let alone exercising an ability to do decent research. Like I say, if you're watching something like a Professor Dave video, you're relying on that person to have done all the research. Now, if you haven't got critical thinking skills, you're not going to recognise the logical fallacies that are employed. You'll just take it all as read and move on with your day. That's most people. Most people don't think, I'm gonna really criticise or be sceptical of what this person's saying and actually look into what he says is his research. I'll see if I can dig out his primary source information and verify what it actually claims. And if it's claiming science, I'll see if it adheres to the method. Things like that. Most people have absolutely zero desire to do.
It's so true as well, because it even goes and that conforms as well. That same framework conforms to the idea of measurement or direct measurement, right? People don't try to, let's say, understand the various methods or means in which you would do so. The same way they don't try. Well, someone says this is scientific. They don't run it through the scientific method. They just assume that person may have done so for them, or they don't even understand that there is a scientific method. Right, and the scientific method, the scientific community are actually eating their own tail. And I was saying about this earlier. It's like an Ouroboros, right? A snake eating its own tail, where they keep releasing these articles that are effectively outlining how the scientific method is effectively a myth. Right, and I'm like, wait, like you can type this in. Anyone can type this in, the myth of methodology, right? And an article will come up, and it's like they're talking about how the scientific method in the field of science really boxes us in. It's like, well, yeah, we get it. The scientific method is reductive as a means to actually denote cause and effect relationships. There's a reason why it is that way, why it is rigorous and rigid. There's a reason why. It doesn't mean certain things can't be true if they don't follow. And I feel like that's the common misunderstanding with a lot of globers. Is like when I talk to them about the scientific method, they go, well, other things can still be true. And I'm like, yeah, of course, other things can be true, but they can't be scientifically validated. Again, it's like this misinterpretation of like, oh, well, if it isn't able to be run through the scientific method, you're just outright saying that this thing doesn't exist. We're not necessarily saying something doesn't exist. It's just that it doesn't fall under the vernacular of science. It doesn't go into those fields at all.
They want to have their cake and eat it. They want to be able to express empiricism. That would be say, what I am stating here is fact. And they want that magic. And in terms of the narrow method of science, that would be the scientific method, then describing it as boxing them in, you say, yeah, it is. It's boxing you in so that when you do it, it's giving you an empirical outcome. Now, if you want to say, well, yeah, but it's quite a pain in the ass to actually achieve empiricism, I'd much rather it was a bit more broad, a bit more expansive. I just make up a story and call it science. And hopefully the magic of people understanding that because I've said science, not the narrow one that's empirical, but my one that's a bit more broad, they'll understand that it's absolute fact even though it's not validated in any way, shape or form. And that's what I'd prefer science was described as. Now, if you look at what pseudoscience is, it's the claim of science where it has not been through the method of science. That's what pseudoscience is. So if somebody says, I would prefer it as a bit more broad, you're like, well, you are by definition pseudoscience.
You prefer pseudoscience then? Yeah, of course. Like,
Yeah, it is narrow. The scientific method is extremely narrow. And unfortunately, that means that unless you've done it, you won't have the empiricism that it has on offer by way of the methodology that has been set in stone. Well, that methodology won't give you something that you can describe as empirical if you haven't done it. Well, that's annoying. I just want to look at that starry night and describe how it's blah, 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 and call that science so that everyone just agrees with me. That would be far easier, wouldn't it?
exactly that, Nathan. Exactly that. And that's the main issue is that, yeah, again, like, cool, you want to be able to apply this in a wilder field, but I feel like it's like the word science has been like deified almost, right? And it's not something that's just used to explain that this thing has been through this method, right? People have forgot that. They forgot the antecedent relationship to what science is. And in doing so, the different various people that would like to sort of push out pseudoscience are just capitalizing on it massively. Like they really have. They've capitalized on it so much. And then so much so that there's been this quantitative easing toward this idea that they could say that the myth it is a myth, that they say, because then they can actually show examples where, well, this is a form of science and it doesn't apply to it. So it's like a reversal almost of like, like I said, an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, right? So it's kind of like, well, are you guys disagreeing then with where the foundation of science is itself? And that's what I would challenge is that, again, if you don't wish to adhere to the scientific method and you want to misappropriate it and you want to commit pseudoscience, right, which I like to say commit it because it's like a crime to me anyway, then cool, like have your own little world. But again, don't try and say we're crazy for trying to keep people on track. We're actually doing the work of which the people that created this methodology would be very pleased of, that we're keeping it at a rigorous level, that we want it to be rigid, and we're reminding people of the rigidity of it.
Indeed. But the majority of what is claimed as science out there isn't science. And at some level, they're going to appreciate that the word itself has power, and they don't want to relinquish that power. So they say, well, as I haven't got the actual power of Grayskull in my quasi-experiment that I'm claiming, I'd prefer if that actual scientific method just was claimed to be just a myth. The myth of empiricism. There's nothing we can really do to validate this completely, but I'm going to call it science so you don't question it. You just understand it's true. I'll give you a load of statistics and say science. Now, if we all just forget that there is actually an empirical method somewhere out in the midst of time that's been forgotten about, then we'll all just remember, because we're all still taught at school that science is empirical, that my version of that is empirical, right? And you're like, no. But it would be really convenient for you if everyone forgot about the fact that you haven't done the empirical method that you're utilising with your language to make everyone think that what you're saying is empirical. Yeah, if we all just forgot about the empirical method, the magic trick wouldn't work. That's why you're saying the snake is eating its own tail. In other words, if we didn't all get taught in 5th grade that science was a method of empiricism and the result at the end of the process was an empirical, unchangeable result, then we wouldn't have your magic trick when you said that word anymore. You'd say science and you'd go, oh, right, so it's just a story you're making up. No, it's empirical. Well, didn't you want the method that we were taught to recognise the magic of its empiricism? Didn't you want that absolved from school? None of us have been taught that anymore, so we don't trust what you say when you just say science anymore, because we weren't taught that it was empirical, because you didn't like that method being in existence because it discredited your stories, didn't it?
Did you compare the use of the word science to the power of Grayskull?
I did.
That's awesome.
I know, I chuckled when he did so too, Chocolate. Good to hear your voice. If not, I was like, where's he been?
It's like a sword that they draw out. They draw out a sword.
What's up, brother?
They draw out the metaphorical equivalent of the sword of Eternia and go, science! And you go, that was maths. There wasn't any science. Yeah, but let's just forget that there's an empirical method. We've broadened our horizon from the dusty old empiricism that we used to say science was when you were taught it. Now we just come up with a story and would prefer to forget about the fact that we haven't done the science bit.
Again, and then we
you're
get
onto
blamed.
something.
We get blamed.
So that's
you're onto something
forward
with
here.
that, because that's what
So
he
that's-
says when he... Go ahead.
I'm sorry, man. I was just gonna say. So that's funny. So now when they say science doesn't prove things, that's literally them taking the power away. That's literally He-Man going back to Adam. Like, oh, we thought we was He-Man real quick, but oh, we realized that we don't have science. So let's just go back to Adam and Cringer. Because science
That's what I
doesn't
was
prove
gonna
things.
say. They
Hilarious.
say, when they grab that science sword, they say, like He-Man says, or Adam before he becomes He-Man, I have the power!
Like, no, we didn't. Science doesn't prove things. No, we didn't.
Yeah, it's the end of the anti-flat
And that's
earth
the
circle
Ouroboros.
jerk. You've got them asserting that science proves things. The whole body of science proves we're on a sphere. We've got the science, blah, 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 blah. And then when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of it saying, okay, where's your science? That would be the application of the scientific method. They'll tell us all day long about how science doesn't prove things. So it's like you've pulled out your science sword, told us how it's science, but then will later tell us how science doesn't prove anything. So why were you telling us about how much science you had? When the reality of it is they come along, assert that they've got science, and they haven't. And when you call them on it and say you haven't got any science, they say it doesn't matter, science doesn't prove anything. Yes, it does. That's all it does. It proves the cause if you validate a hypothesis. And if you don't, it still proves that you haven't got the correct cause. So you varied something and it didn't cause it. You proved it wasn't that. So at the end of the process, all you're going to do is prove something. You're either going to go, that was the cause of it, or that wasn't the cause of it. In both cases, proving something. So that's all it does. But they'll literally tell you science doesn't because they haven't got any.
Well, that's why the scientific method is reductive. That's what it does, like you just stated. This is becoming put out the sword of science. It's like this is becoming increasingly fallacious.
Yeah, but M. Scott Veach, I got into many arguments with him. He says that was the beginning of science. Now we're at the higher stage of science.
Oh, yeah. So basically, it used to be the dusty old proving things. Now we've evolved beyond proving things. That's what that statement says, Neil.
Is that not the
Correct.
counterintuitive, Neil? So the higher, newer science has lower standards of
Yes.
empiricism.
Yeah, and that's what M. Scott Veach is involved in, isn't it? Technology. Yeah? Computer science. And that's not science. Far from it. What an oxymoron. Computers are man-made. You're not going to establish the cause of naturally occurring phenomena in a computer now, aren't you? But that would be lots of mathematics. Yeah, programming. Yeah. That's not science. That's not a study of the physical and natural world. Yeah? It's technology. But it doesn't sound as good, does it? And when you tell people about your technology, people go, oh, that's really nice. When you tell them about your computer science, they offer you a lot more respect. Until you ask them about whether or not you've done any experiments. And then you tell them about the dusty old experiments with their dusty old empiricism and proving things. Who needs to prove things?
as well. They
Guys,
use like the computer science thing. It's like, well, the computer works, so therefore it is science. Again, that's
Nothing wrong with that.
They're basically telling us that empiricism is the old and busted, and pseudoscience is the new hotness.
Yeah.
That's basically what they're saying.
As you would if you're a pseudoscientist. Likewise, if everybody's out there buying Electrolux vacuums and you've got a Kirby to sell, well, then your Kirby vacuum is significantly better than the dusty old Electrolux. Obviously, you've got the best, hottest, newest, most functional on the planet, because we are on a planet. Science says so. What's that you say? Where's my experiment? You don't need to prove things. I just say science.
Yeah, well, he says their science took them to the moon, and we'll take them further.
Oh, really? No. They have a second law of thermodynamics violation sky vacuum to traverse to get to the moon now, don't they, Neil? And their claims of empiricism, that would be stating as fact that they went to the moon. Proof? Why? Well, because of empiricism, that would be science. Well, what kind of science? All of this technology. Oh, so if rockets then sky vacuum travel? Definitely not. But what's that you say, science? Where's the experiment? These rockets. Well, that's not experiments. That's not cause and effect validated by systematic experimentation. That's not science. That's technology. That doesn't prove you went to a sky vacuum. But what's that? If you said science, most people would believe you did. Yeah, we know. They couldn't not have been to the moon. They calculated how much fuel they used. How could they have not been? They calculated how much fuel they used.
How did they do that without the radius?
Yeah, they're going to need a radius.
These pathetic losers, right, base a load of stuff on a lot of nothing, and they have the cheek to tell you that your smartphone proves globe, when your smartphone is based around quantum mechanics originally. They are absolute losers. They're intellectually in the toilet, right? That's what they are, right? They're losing the tiniest amount of respect I ever had for them. They're losing it from me now. I'm not talking about the normie, the ordinary people out there. I'm talking about the people that claim things. And I'm not just talking about anti-flat earthers. I'm talking about all of them, all these supposed claimants, you know, all these Neil deGrasse Tysons, all the rest of them.
Why even go to the smartphones, man? Didn't Sabina say, oh, you're wearing glasses? Therefore, we're living a globe. Science. What? What are you talking about, lady? Are you out of your mind? Are you all out of your minds with this crap that you call science and now tell us that your science doesn't prove shit? This is insane. Living on a damn ball. Did we do housekeeping yet?
No, we didn't. That's okay. I don't mind. It's all good.
Are there ballers in Discord?
Any ballers in Discord?
We have Conrad.
Virus is there.
Virus tends to pipe up when we've got something specific about him, so I don't really count him. He's more than willing to participate when he's required to. But hey, Virus, hello.
Not Virus, D the V.
V the V, hello.
No, D to the V is not a glober, 100%. He's been mislabeled there. I know him quite well.
Maybe not, whoever asked that question. Okay, I'm just going to bring it up. If you type into Google, pseudoscience meaning, this is what you get. A collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly regarded as being based on scientific method. Pretty straightforward.
That kind of sucks for them.
So beliefs or practices. So that could be mathematics, could be heliocentrism, that philosophy. When you say science, you're mistakenly claiming it as science because it hasn't been through the method. It is as simple as that. Yeah, that's old and busted, right, Chocolate?
Oh,
Nathan,
definitely.
I brought out a video there last night. One or two videos. One was about rumpus, but the other one's about Sean Hawkins and his Polaris challenge. All the ballers are pushing this Polaris nonsense for 6 years, right? It's been explained to him over and over again, and what it is. It's been shown. It's been demonstrated. No, they're too dishonest. They won't. And Hawkins has been pushing it, and he's been talking recently as if no one's listening to him, and people are running away from this challenge. It's like the guy is an absolute fundy, right? He is only interested in one explanation, and that's his globe fundamental explanation. That's all he's interested in. So I had enough of him, because even Bev is putting out a thing for him, promoting this thing, promoting Sean Hawkins, because the ballers won't promote him, right? So I made it very clear in a very short video that neither C nor R exists. There is no one-way speed of light measurement. There is no radius value measurement, right? They don't exist, right? So how can you have your Polaris 443 light years away, a huge, massive star, right? 443 light years away from your globe? Can't, right? And I showed how, in reality, the angles to Polaris on a globe don't work to the Polaris we see, the light we see in the sky. You can't see it from their equator. You couldn't see it from their equator. Not can't, you couldn't see it from their equator. And all I'm getting in the comments is how one guy actually started saying C and R are not part of the calculation for Polaris. It's like, yeah, because it's on a flat plane. You know, they're literally admitting right there that C and R have nothing to do with their Polaris claim. Well, if C and R have nothing to do with your Polaris claim, you don't have a claim, idiots.
Right, they've got a linear relationship as they move. So 1 degree every 69 miles. This was getting covered yesterday by Mitchell from Australia. And I'll tell you what, I was smiling from ear to ear as he was detailing it. We covered this on the pre-show, Brian. So it seems like several of us are all converging on the same points about the flat sky, flat ground, linear relationship, parallel lines between all of these GP positions, the flat plane that you've got to have beneath your feet to measure them, how it functions. All of this stuff is all being covered at the same time, which is wonderful. But there's a linear relationship. There's not a squared function going on when you do this, right?
No,
yeah,
I disagree.
QE.
Well,
QE was stating that in War Room the other night.
Yeah, I disagree.
Yeah,
by the simple fact
I
that you
disagree
describe
too.
the
Hold on,
function as a
hold on.
degree.
Go on, Adam.
By the fact you're putting different units in there. So if you weren't putting the units of degrees describes the curve. Now, to apply it to real life, those units are useless until you put an R in, and then you have to convert it, and it won't be a linear function. You get things like the approximation to a curve as 8 inches per mile. But the fact that you've got the degrees in there without any other units, it's just the circle, until you quantify it with R, it's fine, because the degrees are describing that curve exactly, aren't they? Because that's what degrees are. They're a description of curve, of a circle specifically.
I would tear that apart by stating they're bringing angles to Polaris, something impossible on a curved surface. That'll be number one. And number two, what they're actually using is north-south along the longitude lines, regardless of if they talk about latitude. It's going along the longitude lines.
That's all right. You're still right.
The longitude
correct.
distance.
You're still correct, Brian.
Yep.
So if you imagine your longitude lines, you've got your...
No, you didn't let me finish.
Oh, okay, go on then.
The longitude lines are the same exact distance, flat or curved.
Yes.
Can you have angles
But what hold on. What Adam's saying
on the
is...
curved surface?
What Adam's saying is, by using degrees, you're setting your compass or your protractor at the middle of the presupposed spherical Earth and saying that as you move round it, it's dropping in a certain degree value in reference to the presupposed centre. So he's saying just by having degrees, you're assuming that the protractor's in the middle of the sphere when you make the measurements, right, Adam?
Correct, yeah. So you've already presupposed it's in there, that the curve function is in there. I say, What you have to do to put it in onto their ball earth is assign an R value. And then when you do that, you can then convert the degrees into other real life units. Then you don't have a linear function anymore because you have to express it and convert everything. It won't be linear, but it will look a bit linear if you just describe it as degrees and miles, but it isn't because the degrees curve it.
But it is linear because you just use the center of the globe.
He's not denying that, but what he's saying is that just by saying 1 degree every 69 miles, you open up their assumption to transpose onto the centre of a sphere just by pure fiat, just by pure assumption. You've got to have the R because you're saying degrees. Now, what you would rebut that with is, well, the degree is the measurement that you take from the flat surface with your sextant, right? And you're correct. And the function that you're actually observing is linear, also correct. But it doesn't change the fact that they can automatically infer the spherical nature by using degrees off the bat. Now, I hadn't appreciated that till Adam said that. Now, maybe you do, but I'm saying until now I didn't recognise that. Just by saying degrees, they've already got the path split in two. Well, but degrees of what? Well, degrees from the centre of a sphere, they would say.
They've built.
I ran into this when I attempted. My bad. Go ahead.
They've built the ball earth and they've defined the measurement that you've then taken as that ball earth falling away or falling back on you. That's as soon as you use that degrees in respect to the ball earth, it defines the geometry of the ball earth, and therefore there is no linear. It's a circle. Every bit of it is a different part of the circle. So to calculate, say, if after 10 degrees, yeah, you've got 690 miles. That's 690 miles of circumferential distance. Yeah, it's applicable to that circumference. That's what they're saying. The curve's already in there because it's functioned by the degrees, and by once you put R in, then it defines what the actual physical drop is, not just as a mathematical ratio of it as a degree.
Correct. So hold on, let me just round this out. So by recognition, now that Adam's explained this, the moment you get to that particular potential junction or split in the road, you've got to tie them down and say, if you're going to assume it, which they will be just by saying degrees, they're going to say, well, that's justified to the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth. Where'd you get R? But you've got to know to ask it at that stage, which I didn't till Adam pointed this out.
Yeah, you can only get the 69 miles per degree if you put R in. That's what it works out at. If you multiply 69, guys, by 360, you'll see that it comes out to be their supposed equatorial distance, their circumference value.
It will also come out to be the diameter of a flat plane if you use which is what Eratosthenes actually measured until he decided it's claimed he decided that the sun's rays were parallel.
Correct also. So that's why I said it was a split in the road. Just 1 second. Yes, that's why it's a split in the road. But by way of the language that will be used by anti-flat earthers, you may very well inadvertently find yourself on a sphere path without realising it. And you're right, Brian, yeah, you can do it both ways. But you've got to recognise that fork in the road is being presented to you at this point.
Once you let them beg the question, it's no longer erroneous based on the premise that they've set up. So I ran into this after having gotten this information, and I took it online and I got my butt handed to me. I said, and I realized immediately, well, why did I give them R?
But you're not giving them R. They're taking the R, and they're basing everything on a circle. What you're talking about, what Adam's talking about, is a 2D circle, not a sphere. It's a 2D circle. Number one. Secondly, it's only based on the distance of the longitude lines from one side to the other, which is a diameter without parallel sun rays. Right? A diameter, if you want to call it a diameter, it's a diameter straight across without parallel sun rays. But there's a bigger problem. There is no C, there is no one-way speed of light measurement for this 443 light years away Polaris. So they can't claim that you have to have that all the light rays from Polaris comes in parallel. You understand what I mean? They can't claim all this nonsense. Like, they're trying to claim that every line off of their globe goes directly straight up towards Polaris, as opposed to the angular size that of a light we see in the sky, which it doesn't even have a real angular size. It's just, as even Rumpus admitted, all the stars are just point sources. So, they have a load of nonsense claims that are based on absolutely nothing. They still have to use an angle. If they try to bring it to the center of their globe, they're still using an angle, right, to the center of, if they want to, kind of using the diameter to the diameter of their equator. They don't have anything. They have no R, they have no C. There's nothing. There's none of them can beat it.
Epic. Good conversation.
Can I just add something here?
Go ahead, George.
Well, if you are at 0 degrees on the equatorial line and you observe the northern star, that is your circle of equal altitude. It will be the diameter of the so-called sphere, because you need to have a circle of equal altitude. So the radius point on your reading will be the zenith of the polar star, the northern star, and you on the equator line at 0 degrees, you need to have a circle of equal altitude, and that will be your radius.
Yeah.
That is. Sorry.
Go on, Brian. Go on.
I was just saying that is, he's correct and incorrect, because their equator is not a circle of equal altitude. Their equator wouldn't be a circle of equal altitude if you're talking about a flat plane distance using that 69 miles per degree. It wouldn't be. It'd be closer to 39,000 miles. Just under 39,000 miles would be a circle of equal altitude then.
Their equator would be a hemisphere of equidistance from the center. It would not be a circle of equal altitude.
But he's right in these.
Yeah, that's the radius I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, he's right though. You are right in your premise. I don't mean to say you. I should say you are right in your premise that taking a distance to 0 degrees is basically a circle of equal altitude in reality from Polaris.
Except that doesn't match real world, as you can see.
I guess my point is, you don't need to beg the question of a sphere and calculate for a vertical drop, which is non-existent.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, you learn something new every day.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
It just exists in the math.
I mean, if you're a newbie and you're listening to this, you'll be like scratching your head going, what the hell are they talking about? Because what we're talking about is preemptively recognising where someone slips in a begging the question fallacy. And that even that description might go over some people's heads. But that's what we're doing. We're saying at this particular point of the discussion, the moment they say it moves in a degree, doesn't matter what they give it as the scale, they're just automatically assuming that that is going to be the degrees that you put out, like on a clock face. If you've got a globe with the centre of the clock being in the middle of the globe, as the hand moves round, you're going to count that as the degrees of motion. So it's automatically assumed by language. Now, Brian's also pointed out, well, you don't have to do that. Well, no, you don't. But when we're dealing with anti-flat earth fundies, that is what they'll do without saying a word. But they have, and that's what Adam's pointed out, the moment they say degrees, you go, oh, let's clarify what we mean. We're talking about degrees in terms of your vertex that you take off a sextant on a flat plane with a straight line to the GP, or are you talking from the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth? If so, where'd you get R?
Yeah, thanks for outlining that then, Adam, because I didn't quite realise that myself either. Yeah, you're exactly right on that, I believe. So yeah, that was very, very edifying.
But I can visualise it in my mind going down that path with a fundy and not seeing it. And then suddenly you're into, well, that can only work on a sphere, but it seems justifiable because you haven't recognised that 3 or 4 steps ago you hadn't asked for R. You hadn't said, why are we suddenly doing this with the assumption that it's moving around a curved surface? Why are we doing that? And you wouldn't recognise where the question got begged.
We flat earthers attribute that degree change in the sky to perspective and distance, and the sextant demonstrates how we can use that to calculate. They attribute that degree change to Earth curve. That's where it doesn't, there's no distance with it, because everything is off at an infinite point wherever you are on the ball. So the only change is rotation, is curvature. As you angle away or towards it, that's what changes it in there, and it's R that defines that rate of change.
Yes.
No one's actually traveled 69 miles and went up. There's 1 degree. 16 up. There's 2 degrees. Like, no one's ever done that. They're just making stuff up mathematically.
But there are 3 things that's needed. You need the one-way speed of light measurement, doesn't exist. You need the R value measurement for a globe, doesn't exist. And you need sun rays and rays of light from claimed spheres to be parallel. It's crazy. No such thing. Doesn't exist.
Well, other than those things, it's all easy.
Yeah, it's proven other than that.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? This is the point where it's just getting assumed. So, yeah, you can get into that wrangle-dangle of how you've actually proved the spherical surface that's now being assumed by language of degrees. Well, yeah, you just ask them where they got their R value, and, you know, black swan, that's the end of the argument, basically, isn't it? But if you don't know, you're begging the question when you're 2 or 3 assumptions further down the line. It's a difficult job to backtrack. Hold on, back a minute ago when we were talking about degrees, it's like, who's going to do that when they don't know?
Well, yeah, because you've accidentally affirmed that, right? You've affirmed it, and you've gone far too far forward to sort of then undo your own language at that point, because then it's almost as if, again, you're backpedaling on what you yourself have said. So it would be important in order to sort of establish a language that would, again, not sort of, again, hand them the radius. They don't have the radius in the first place, but again, it's probably not a good idea to start off by sort of somewhat handing the radius in order to take it away later, right?
I mean, you can always do that. I mean, back in the early days, I did do that. You know, you'd fall into all of these traps because you wouldn't recognise any of them. And then eventually, when you realised you were in a massive trap, you just ask them where they got their R value from. And then that would kind of bring it close to the argument. But that was before the black swan. You know, we were still asking people for R before the black swan came along. We've been asking for R for, I mean, I said more than 2 years. It's probably been more than 3 years.
Oh, no, it's been...
Nathan, what did I tell you in the pre-show?
A whole episode of asking Rumpus for R. It's great.
You remember what I told you in the pre-show?
You'll have to remind me.
The sextant, and where we have the argument, is taking them right back to R.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But with that, I'm going to say a huge, massive, enormous thank you first and foremost to both Discord and G+ panels for making today's live show possible. If you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Premiering streams, however, stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Massive thanks to all of you who smashed the PayPal link, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, all that good stuff. Once again, stay tuned if you're watching on a Premiering stream. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.